Hey there, and welcome to the daily podcast where wisdom smacks us with kisses or love taps. I'm MichelleSpiva, a wisdom strengthening coach, your host, and practical priestess of wisdom. Mwah. Join us daily to gain wisdom and mental strength as we tackle innovative thinking, address emotional and behavioral life traps, and yes, provide you with some practical how to's to wrap it all up. So settle in or crank up the speed 2x, whatever gets your mental processes firing as we dive in. Stay tuned. Yay! Hey, this is MichelleSpiva, and I want to welcome you to today's podcast of Wisdom Smack with me, your hostess and practical priestess of wisdom. Mwah. Thank you so much for taking your time to share with me your precious time, as today we're going to be talking about the essence of embers, those dying, glowing remains of a fire. And we're going to be talking about how that applies to our lives right now. What happens when it's time for us to resume our daily lives? What happens when the fire has died and we're now just left with glowing embers of what used to be? So join me as we talk about beware of the embers. I'll see you on the flip. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today, we're talking about beware of the embers. And the embers for me are symbolic and literal. Um, how I want to start this off is I want to start this off by a quote from a professor of African American Studies here in Atlanta from Emory University, Dr. Carol Anderson. And she talks about the quote that I'm going to give with regards to civil unrest, racial inequality, and the like. But I'm going to be putting a slightly different bent on it. So here's what she says. She says, stop concentrating on the eruption of flames and focus on the kindling of devastation. Stop looking for the spectacular and notice the simmer. Excuse me. We're so focused on the flames that we've missed the kindling. Now, she talks about kindling, which is the fire starter. She even talks about the eruption of flames that lead to the devastation. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the third part, the embers, which are the glowing hot coals that are heated and just as hot as the fire, but they are the representation of the remains of the dying fire. They are the smoldering. They are the underneath. They are the parts that, if not given proper attention, they can come back and cause even more damage by bursting forth and giving birth to an even bigger fire the next time. And when we talk about these embers, or when I'm talking about these embers, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they started to come about. So today I was doing some research for actually my podcast, and I had a different topic that I was definitely interested in doing. And I saw a few things and I was like, oh, that's not good. And it seemed like all the different sites I went to, the articles, the think pieces, and the like, they all started speaking to me in this way. And so here's our wisdom smack for today. And the wisdom smack is beware of the embers. Beware of the hot, glowing fire, of the last gasp of the raging fire that you may have already gone through or that you're currently going through. Please let this serve as a wisdom smack to keep you aware, hyper aware even, of those little areas that, if not given proper attention to, can come back on you and show their faces in many different ways. So, one of the articles I looked at talked about the impact of, I'm in the United States, and so I was reading papers geared toward the United States, and it was talking about the impact of how workers will react or if we get back to a point where the places that laid them off are hiring again. And I read all of the things that were said, and I looked at it and I was like, one thing I do know is that you can never go back home. It's kind of like that old saying that says, you can never go to the same place in the river because the water is always moving. And the embers of that would be for people to think with hubris, arrogance that, oh, yes, we're just going to go back. I saw another statement by someone, and it's very true, that said, for those who think that if you've closed your business or shuttered your business down for a few months, that you can just flip a switch and turn it back on, you've never run a business. And I'm like over here, like, amen, hallelujah. Yes, tell the truth. And it is true. And what is happening with a lot of us is that I know I was guilty of it. We've got these blinders on where we just think that we just paused. You know how you pause a video and then it picks right back up? Well, guess what? This isn't a pause. This is kind of like when you're watching a movie, you can't pause it. You got to go to the restroom. You go to the restroom, and when you come back, it is not where it was. It has moved on. And now you're kind of disoriented because you don't know what's going on. Like, how did they get here and how did they get there? Those are some of the embers underneath, some of the faulty assumptions that we're making. And I want to say something about faulty assumptions. They tend to throw off a lot of smoke and cloud up the pathway and the plans. The other day, I talked about conjunctive events bias, and it's a fancy way for saying that we tend to plan for events to line up in an exact order that we like to get the results that we want from our plan. But that's not how life works. And because that's not how life works, you're not going to necessarily get your plan to work exactly how you'd like it to most of the time. I even talked about how Dwight Eisenhower talked about, plans fail, but being a planner is indispensable. And it lends to what we're talking about today, that yes, our outlook of what life after this pandemic will look like is probably a faulty assumption, probably very cloudy, and probably all kinds of wrong. But it still makes sense for us to start getting to the point where we can see life after the pandemic. But be mindful of the embers. Be mindful of those underneaths, those glowing coals that are sometimes overshadowed by all the ash that they're producing on top of them. The very word embers means ash. And I don't know about you, but I remember when I was a kid and I would love to play with the logs that were burning out. And I would scrape the ashes off the top and I would see the embers. And sometimes, I know I wasn't supposed to do this, but sometimes I would blow on them. And as I would blow them, they would get even brighter. And then every now and again, one of them would spark and a little flame of fire would come back out. And that stuck with me because the essence of an ember is a situation waiting to bring chaos and destruction right back into your life, to eat away and evaporate everything that you think that you are building or that you're going to build. And so you got to be careful, beware of the embers. Now, there's another thing. I wrote these things down and I want to make sure I get them to you today. Okay. So I wrote this down. And when I wrote it down, I was like, okay, is this talking about us individually, us as a community, or what is it talking about? So here goes. I wrote down desire and demand surge in times like this. But on the other side, our ability to be accurate and our ability to plan plummet. And it was inspired by some of the writings that I looked at today. And when I sat there and I looked at it, I was like, what does that really mean? And to me, at this particular time, the ability to regain your desire to go and do things and live life, before, or not before, but, live a life that fairly has a little bit of, carefreeness to it. And then your ability to have, demands for doing things, they're eventually going to come back. For some people, they've already come back. There are some people who are willing to risk it all to just go out and hang out with people because they're being challenged right now with the mandates of their local principalities of staying away, social distancing. And when I looked at that, I was like, there is a lot to be said about how our human natureness emerges when there are times like this. But when those desires and those demands, I'm human, I can't be caged, and all these kind of things come up, you still got to be aware. Be aware that the embers are still burning. And that's why you get cloudy. That's why your ability to accurately know how to step and how not to mess up gets shrouded. And so I want to encourage us that just because there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel doesn't mean that we need to forget that you got to definitely make sure that when there has been a fire, and there is definitely one, and I'm just going to be honest and say, I don't believe the fire has anywhere nearly gotten to the point where it's about to die down. I really don't. But don't turn your back on it, because embers can come back to bite. Another thing is that thinking about our society as we knew it, thinking about how, whether we liked it or not, we were basically forced to have a major breakup. And that breakup was in the way we socialize, the way we get our livelihood, and so many other things, even the way we have our consumables. In the United States, our consumables that contributed to the GDP were so high. There were estimates that in last year alone, we got up to almost 90% of consumables feeding into our gross domestic product, which is unheard of. Where we used to be, I know, solidly like at 70%, and that's real high. But then to go from up there to where we are now, where it's kind of like screech, stop. Don't you think there are going to be some ripples? Don't you think there are going to be some aftermath and some aftershocks that can come back to bite us if we quickly try to go back to what we think, or what we believe is due us or owed to us as a way of life? There is this statement, and I've heard comedians talk about it, philosophers and the like, and that is, it's part of the hedonistic treadmill that we're on. That we it, as humans, we don't like to regress. Once we're used to a certain comfort, once we're used to a certain way of life, technology, status, wealth, it's hard for us to regress. And because of that very thing, we are hurting, a lot of us, and I'm including me, because life as we know it, it's not like it used to be. You can't just run out and go meet up with friends downtown for a quick bite and drinks. You can't just go and uh, see your friend's baby and hug and kiss on the baby and all this. It's so much. Like the other day, I was thinking about something I wanted to eat, and it had a lot of nuts in it, and I was like, be careful, because the last thing you want to do is go to the dentist or have to or need to go to the dentist at a time like this. And it's like, I would have never thought about that, before partaking. Now, of course, I did eat it, and it was good, and it was, like I said, it was just some nuts and stuff, and but I would that thought still came, and I'm very grateful and thankful, for some, uh, good teeth right now. But just the way we move, we're not going to be able to move that same way. So then I looked at what was the aftermath. And I don't even want to call it an aftermath. It was more like an after scarring of people who made it through the Great Depression. And they became mistrustful. They became all about loyalty, and they became all about being very circumspect. 360-degree vetting and looking before they leaped. They became savers. They did not buy out of credit. My grandparents even said things to me growing up like, "In God we trust, everybody else would check out." My grandparents were always like, never be without something saved, never, be without. um Save up. Don't just put everything on credit. My grandmother was like, "You're a fool if you buy furniture on credit." And I mean, just different little things of how they looked. And I see us returning to those ways because of the trauma and the shock and the fire that we're going through. So let me talk a little bit about uh, some of the things that I was gleaning from today as I was, looking for my notes to finish up my notes for what I wanted to talk about today. And I was talking about, the breakup or the breakaway. And the breakup, whether it was from your job or whether it was from people that you usually spend a lot of time with, what these breakups and breakaways are going to do are they're going to force people to test out other pastures, whether it be learning how to spend quality time alone, or whether it be having to go and work for another company or the like. Uh, I live in Atlanta and we have a large airline industry here. And one of our largest has started sending out furlough information and actually telling their employees that they can go work at another local based company that's large and that they are hiring. And I was like, how do you tell your employees that we're going to furlough you and, oh, go get a job at Home Depot? And I thought about it. And I was like, well, what's going to happen when everything goes back to where people need to fly again? There's a lot of training and information and knowledge that's needed to work in and around the airplanes. So you're going to just cannibalize and gut your talent and then have to start over anew. Everybody's going to suffer if that happens, and on and on and on. I kept seeing this and I was like, see, these are those embers that are just waiting to reignite and cause even more damage. And yes, it's going to be something because those people who have to be on the front lines and can't, you know, a lot of your service people who were in the airlines, who were doing customer service for um, restaurants or whatever, they're impacted. And what's going to happen is they're going to have to be forced to go and test other pastures, and they may not return. And so there's going to be a total shifting of how a lot of industries are run because there's going to be some adjustment time for when you go back and you have to try to find people and your talent has left. So now you got to retrain, but everybody is still expecting. Remember that hedonistic treadmill? Everybody's still expecting a certain level of service that they had because it's hard to go back. It's hard to get less than what you've been accustomed to. And then this part is something that I was being a little naive and myopic about it. I'll just go on and say it. A lot of my talking about the pandemic has been based on the understanding that I work from home and that I'm kind of like talking to other people who get to work from home. And that's not the case for a lot of people. Up to 30% of our population did not work from home, and they're being highly impacted right now. And so there is starting to emerge a huge disparity between those who have the ability to earn with their hands as opposed to those who have the ability to earn with their heads. And so there are many people who couldn't just say, "Oh, I'll go, and drive this bus from home." People still uh, people still depend on public transportation. There, just recently, last week, there was a gentleman who took to social media and his video as a bus driver and who was complaining of someone who was on the bus sick, coughing, or whatever. And then 2 weeks later, he's not with us anymore. And I don't normally go this route, but I'm just going to say this really quickly and move on. At this particular time during this recording, there have been a lot of studies that have come out about um, Americans in my demographic, not demographic, excuse me, in my ethnic demographic of being Black or American descendants of slaves, ADOS, who are having a higher amount of effects of the coronavirus. And people are running around trying to figure this out. And I'm like, no, 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 no. This is part of the fire and the embers. And the reason why is because it's not where they're trying to blame it so much on health issues. And I'm like, is it really just health issues, or is it the fact that there are a disproportionate amount of people from this segment and this sector who are the last hired, first fired, and so thus they end up working jobs that require your hands. Jobs in the service industry. They have to be out and among them. Today, there was a disheartening article of gig workers who deliver foods, and they actually called out the company, Instacart, where people will post exorbitant tips to lure people to prioritize them to bring them their food or whatever they're delivering, and then cancel the tip. So they're duping these poor workers. And these people are out here putting their lives on the line to deal with them and to transport all this stuff where many hands have touched it. And so when you have a higher percentage of people who have to be out, not because they want to, but because they must to be able to put food on the table, feed their children, and do what they can to ink out a living, of course, you drive up the probability for them to get infected at higher numbers. Let's not even talk about our postal service here in the United States. It is one of the highest employers of people, American descendants of slaves. Let's just be honest with it and think about how much they have to touch and all of these things just to give you your mail that you're still expecting, or the bus drivers, or the sanitation workers, or the people who are actually doing a lot of the cleaning of the places that folks want cleaned before they walk in. And so there is a ripple effect, and we must be mindful of that because of the fact that these are also your embers. If left unattended, they will rise up. um, One of the articles, and like I said, I have some of my favorite people, and I'm gonna give another shout out to Mr. Morgan Housel over at the Collaborative Fund. And so he put out an article today, and he was asking what next. And this was like after I had read so many different think pieces and things. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so weird because he's saying some of the stuff I'm saying, but in a different way. And there was a little part I wanted to bring attention to, and that was he quoted himself from a piece he had written about 6 months ago back in October. And this is what he said of the population and those who are in the lower sectors. And this is what he said. He said, historically, power is transitory. It shifts when those who don't have it get fed up and they bond together to gain enough influence to take it back. Never underestimate the power of a unified group of powerless people with a shared goal. He goes on to say, what happens when the bottom starts pushing back against the top? Part of it is already happening. And then he goes on to mention some of the things. And I was arrested in reading that because I was like, yeah, because I was so angered when I looked at how people are being mean. How can you do this to people who live? Unfortunately, they don't have a living wage. They're not getting paid a living wage to deliver your food. So they depend on these tips. And how dare you do this to them? But that's part of those cloudy assumptions that your fire won't come back to bite you. And I just want to tell you, it might not be you because, usually people who rock with me, we don't do that kind of stuff. So it might not be you. But if you happen to know of somebody who has an issue and does that kind of thing, please, 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 please make them aware that beware of the embers. That dying part that you see, that lower caste, as you will, that you think they could rise up and they could start a whole new fire and they could snatch back the power that you think you may have. But that's not all of what this podcast is about today. What I want to also say is this, and that is that when you go through something like this, it has lasting effects. I remember a client that I had a while back, and she had gone through a fire where she had lost a lot of things in her home, and we're both avid readers. And she said one time, if you ever, want to give me a book, because I think I had mentioned gifting her a book. She was like, please don't give me the book. She said, just send it to me electronically, get me a Kindle version or whatever version. And she explained that she, used to have pride in her library, but when she lost everything in the fire, it was hard because there was so much that she couldn't replace. And so she then moved to, and this was right around the time when the cloud was becoming popular and places like Dropbox were giving away free gigs to get people used to the new concept, because it was new and people were like, what is this? I don't trust this. But she was an early adopter of it. And she was like, give me those things because I can retrieve them. I have a little more insurance now. And I remembered her today and what she said about that, because we're not going to be the same. No matter how much you think you desire and demand to go back to business as usual, you don't come out of something like this the same. And it is folly for us to think any other way. And so I wanted to say that as part of what we're endeavoring to do, because I'm going to say this one more time, I do not believe that the fire has finished burning out. I don't. And even if it has for some, don't turn your back on it, because those embers, they burn just as hot as the fire and they become the new kindling to start a new fire. How many times have you heard about a raging forest fire and they attribute it to one point where somebody thought that they had put out a harmless fire, but they had left the embers? So again, I want to encourage you to search through your life, search through all those areas where there are possibly some lingering things that you haven't addressed, whether it be related to the aftermath of the pandemic or other things. Because I'm going to tell you, this pandemic is bringing out a lot of stuff in a lot of people. It's really showing people the make of their metal. There are some people who are figuring out that they are very organized, that they are able to take care of doing things for themselves. And then there are others that are like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much supervision I require each day to do what I need to do. There are a lot of eye opening things that are happening. And this is the time, hopefully, this is the time for us to all be circumspect, all of us to take inventory of what's in our closets, what's lingering in the unused portion of the basements of our minds, as James Baldwin would say. Have we gone down there and dusted and tidied up? Have we explored those things that are lingering? Because I'm going to tell you, when you go through things like this, you have to realize that what you endure through times like this dictates, I should say, how you emerge. Are you going to be able to emerge where you're the better for it? Or are you going to have all these little fires? And I thought that was really something when I was, putting together today's podcast. The title of a show and a book that I have made reference to a few times on some other podcasts. I said, "Wow, that's so apropos that little fires everywhere would come out just about now." And that's what embers do. they have the ability to start little fires everywhere to the point where those fires become one big raging fire that wipes you out and takes away any and everything that defines who you are and who you used to be. And so, coming back full circle, the essence of Embers. To me, at this particular time, with the situation that we find ourselves in, which is a highly unlikely situation, but has high impact, I'm going to say that embers represent those underlying issues that have been festering for too long, that are just waiting for you to turn your back on them so they can come and do even more damage and destruction. Embers are beautiful to look at, but they hide. Mhm. They hide under the front lines of their brethren, and they actually mean ash. But you got to be careful because sometimes the ash covers up a lot of stuff, and we make faulty assumptions that the fire is out and that it's safe to go back out. So I'm going to tell you, slow your roll. Take this time that's been granted to you. Get past the carnal desires and demands that are surging within you to slow down and beware. Search for the embers. Take care of them, douse them, and do what you can and what you must to protect yourself and your future. Be mindful and respectful of other people, lest you turn those embers against you as well. Somebody said that karma might not know your name, but she never forgets your address. So be kind to one another as well. And so, with that, guess what? My time is up, and I do thank you for yours. This has been MichelleSpiva, your practical priestess of wisdom, with another podcast of Wisdom Smack. Don't forget to check the show notes, like, subscribe, and share. And because this is a daily podcast, guess what, y'all? I'm going to see you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day. Talk to you soon. And that's going to do it for today's podcast of Wisdom Smack with MichelleSpiva. If you like this podcast, please help us get the word out. Like, comment, subscribe, and even share. And if you really like it, please help us continue to get the word out by considering using this show's link for Amazon. So when you want to go to Amazon and you do all of your general shopping, please use MichelleSpiva.com/AMZ. It's simple as that. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and this show might receive a little bit of commission that will go towards helping to further get these episodes out to you and to others. So thank you so much for listening. This has been MichelleSpiva with Wisdom Smack. Bye.